Welcome everybody to the latest episode in my series on the various lore of Slayer creatures within Runescape. If you've been enjoying the content, please like, comment, and subscribe, and enjoy the video. Runescape lore. Slayer creatures. Chapter 6. Scabarites. To know the Scabarite creatures, as they come in many species, is to look to their deity, Scabaras. Scabaras is part of the Menethite pantheon, consisting of Tumekin, god of light, his wife Eladinis, goddess of fertility, their children Ixlarin, god of the underworld, and Amaskut, goddess of rebirth. Alongside them can be found the four demigods, being Mekin, goddess of friendship and pleasure, Krondis, goddess of resourcefulness, Het, god of strength and mental health, and finally Scabaras, god of wisdom and isolation. The central idea of the Scabarite belief is to gain a permanent mental state of tranquility, known as enlightenment, and is accomplished by isolating oneself from the outside world and avoiding contact with any other living creature as much as possible. This did in fact have quite a big influence on many Caridian inhabitants, but eventually the Scabarite did break that mold and appeared on the surface, but we will look at that later. For now, where did Scabaras come from? As due to his isolationist nature, very little is known of his history, and what is, comes from legend and is hotly disputed. The first story on the origins of Scabaras comes from a text known as the Book of Light and Day, which holds the story of Tumekin's dream. It reads,
Day the 4th, Scabaras. On the 4th day of his dream, Tumekin chose to travel to the south of the desert. Not much was to be found in this region, but it was the last place unexplored by him. So he set out. The heat was particularly fierce that day, but regardless, Tumekin pressed on through endless dunes. Hours passed without event. Not a single soul crossed the god's path. Not one lone settlement. Yet the sun still bore down on the god, sweltering and desecrating him. Tumekin reached for his skin, for Elid's lifeblood, but found it empty. He had drained it on his previous travels, forgetting to refill it each day. Knowing his predicament, he knew he had to seek shelter from the heat and wait out the day, lest he himself succumb to the desert. As he was nearing his limits, his graceful eyes fell upon a long tunnel entrance which delved deep below the desert, providing him with a cool place in which to recuperate. Many more hours passed within this cave, providing the god with ample time in which to reflect forlornly. During this time, he saw a small beetle burrow his way into the chamber, but noticing Tumekin, the creature buried away. An hour later, the beetle emerged out of another tunnel, but seeing the god still there, disappeared once again. Yet another hour passed and the beetle returned, but Tumekin was ready this time, snatching up the cautious little thing and said, "You are indeed the most unusual being, digging your tunnels in isolation, avoiding contact even with me, your god. I shall give unto you a piece of myself, so that you might help me rule this desert realm, an example to my people of what can become of them, should they stray too far into solitude." And so the lesser god Scabaras was forcibly born, the last of the lesser gods. And Tumekin longed again to see his wife and children, and was impassioned by Scabaras to end his dream, for despite their flaws, they were no more flawed than he. Night had now fallen, so after emerging from the cave, Tumekin returned to his camp at the center of the desert. not to rest for another day's journey, but to awaken from his dream.
The second and more commonly told tale, also from Tumeken's dream, says that on that fourth day, Tumeken had a nightmare. From this nightmare was accidentally born Scarabis, a result of Tumeken's increasing isolation. A final version of this tale, to which the overwhelming majority of Scabarites adhere to, states that the first 3 days of Tumeken's dream ultimately proved unsatisfying, and that Tumeken sought to create a more perfect god. On the fourth day, he created Scarabis, whom he ultimately found the most satisfying and ideal. Some scholars even go as far as claiming that Scarabis was Tumeken's favorite son, though it was questioned why Tumeken would tolerate the banishing of his favorite child, in a matter not yet discussed. According to the Senlitin, the pharaoh queen who once ruled the land south of Al-Kharid, that during the Second Age, followers of Scarabis were generally associated with scholars, philosophers, and other intellectuals. She states that there is now much dissent between the different sects of the pantheon, where there once was cooperation, suggesting that following of Scarabis was once more accepted. In the quest Missing My Mummy, the Senlitin says,
Scarab cleanses mind and body through solitude. His followers are always deep thinkers, coming to conclusions tempered by lack of distractions. If you wish for a life of study, you can do no better than to follow his ways.
She also goes on to state that,
by the example of the dung beetle, we learn that the unpalatable may be transformed into life through proper attitudes.
an example which is followed by all who attempt to make the barren desert their home. Coming into the early Fourth Age, the followers of Scarabis were banished from the Kharidian lands, with some testimonials even indicating that this included the demigod himself, although the many sources do not agree with this notion. The most widely accepted account of this supposed event comes from the Sophonim High Priest, Niete, and the Sphinx, claiming that the sect of Scabaras attempted to tunnel underneath the river Elid. Their motives were unclear, but Elidinus saw this as an attempt to undermine her, and as a result, she smited them in retribution, burying them hundreds of thousands of miles beneath the sand, never to be heard of or seen again. Another of these legends, this one told by the natural historian from the Varrock Museum, says that Scarabis proclaimed himself omnipotent and outlawed worship of all other gods. People soon revolted against him and his repressive rule and banished him, spilling his blood over his scarabs and turning them into calphites. This, however, is once again doubted, as it would contradict Scarabis' core belief of isolation. Like I mentioned previously, the Scabite species at one point did break free from the isolation. In the late 5th Age, a large group found a home within the city of Uluk, once among the most prosperous in the entire world. Following the fall of Zaros from power and the start of the God Wars, the Kharidian Desert became the site of many brutal battles, due in large part because of the banishment of the Empty Lord's followers and the heated conflicts between Zamorak and Sardamon. Another to join the fray at this time was Lord Draken, looking to expand his influence to other regions as he sought to extend his control over Mauritania from the HoloLens. During this time, the northern desert was hit particularly hard, the city of Uzur being destroyed by the elder demon Thamarin, and Uluk soon after, being assaulted and overtaken by the demon Balfrug Krieth. The refugees that escaped the battle hid in the extensive tunnel network beneath the city. However, the continuous threat above made it so they were unable to return to the surface, making survival nearly impossible. The conditions in the tunnels were miserable and many fell victim to disease and starvation. Their supply of timber quickly began to wear thin, and the dried camel dung used as a fuel source became wet and infested with maggots, leaving the tunnels without ventilation or light. Eventually, the refugees found a way to the surface and bypassed the conflict raging on. What few survivors were left traveled to the Menophyte settlement of Sophanum and contributed greatly to the city's construction. Eventually, the survivors of Ulick were absorbed into Menophyte society, effectively ending the city's legacy. With all that being said, it sets the stage for the Scabarites, as in recent times, a large congregation of them discovered Ulick's tunnel system, and realizing the value of the now abandoned tunnels and swamps, they have begun worshipping in the area. To ensure their minds are not polluted by contact with outsiders, they sealed all entrances and positioned guards in the surrounding areas. In a book you assemble from scattered entries, called Scabaras Research, the Scabarites had documented their time. It reads,
"As Scabarite custom dictates, the outer gateways have been sealed. No disturbances will now occur, and we may worship in peace. The fortuitous discovery of a large stock of ordure may even allow some of our less pious worshippers to breed. The relaxation of breeding rules may have been something of a mistake. More of the young seem to believe we should leave the darkness and seek to explore the outer areas where odd noises have been heard. I shall pray for guidance, even though answers from Scabaras are clearly unlikely."
Although there was some unrest within the sect, the Scabarites did hold still. That is, until Amascot entered the picture. She convinced their high priest through visions that to obtain ultimate solitude, all other life must be destroyed. Let's hear the unraveling of events from the Scabarite. The book continues.
"Although he did not reply directly, I have been seized by visions of some sort. A female with a red sheen carapace and antenna spoke to me, sending disquiet through my soul. Could it really be that only the destruction of all other life will allow us to the isolation we crave? I am convinced we will break through the surface and ensure these noises are quieted. Silence shall be ours. Both the chasm and the outer areas are currently under investigation by those dedicated enough to escape pollution of their souls for the greater good. The chasm has proven to be a dead end to us for the moment. The external trek has been useful though. We discovered some large creatures not wholly unlike us, with the capacity to leap great distances. Some have been captured for research. There were other creatures too, dead but moving. Could this kind of existence provide the ultimate solitude? A breakthrough of sorts. The leaping creatures have enabled us to send warriors up the chasm to explore. They report a large area of tunnels which they are now securing with traps. Traps that should be effective against the soft-skinned humans we can even now smell. Contact. We have slain several human warriors after emerging into the outer areas of the surface settlement. I am, however, worried that this contact might be sullying the forces. I have instructed that more traps be used so that pollution does not occur. The red-tinged female reappeared and urged for a more active destruction of the surface dwellers. The dreams come evermore, and my mind is torn. She speaks for Scabaras, and I shall follow. But I have not had such communication in years, and the toll upon me is telling. Everything is blurring.
The high priest is able to regain a little bit of consciousness and begins to push back against the mind control. As soon as he begins questioning the morals of his actions, he once again succumbs to Amascot's power. The final reading says,
Now I realize there are two minds within me, and neither is strong enough. To be cursed so, with no chance to be alone, even with myself. I must control my thoughts. Or should that be we? Paralyzed by indecision or firm in the face of adversary, aloof or apathetic, violent or strong, merciful or weak. There is no difference within me. What will be the ultimate fate? The high priest seems to be wandering in his mind, so we follow his last instructions as Scabaras would wish us to. The outsiders will be destroyed. We slew one in the upper chambers and set our largest guardian to guard the area where he was found, all too close to the chasm. A setback. The scarab guardian we left by the chasm was slain. Although no penetration has been made into the nest via this route, we have increased the number of perimeter traps and are considering a full assault upon the settlement known as Sophanum. We have had reports of an intruder in the vaults before the doors, an area not fully set with traps. I have had visions of Scabaras in guise of a female with red chitin. Now I know what we must do. Destroy everyone for ultimate peace and solitude.
In the Dealing with Scarabaeus and Contact quest, the adventurer is able to break the chains of influence and save the High Priest. To this day, the Scarabite creatures continue to roam the desert, not involved or engaged in any conflict. This is Gillinor though. There is always something on the horizon. Thank you everybody for listening, and thank you Chunk Yony and his wife, as well as Dr. Funk MD for voicing lines. Runescape. Forever.